The hum of an old floor buffer echoed softly against the cavernous soundstage, its steady rhythm almost like a heartbeat. Sam Hightower guided the machine across the concrete floor with practiced ease. His shoulders relaxed, his face calm beneath the glow of the high-mounted lights. To anyone watching, he was just a janitor, gray coveralls, worn sneakers, a rag tucked in his back pocket. But beneath that stillness lived a man who carried decades of battles in his bones and memories that refused to leave him. He paused for a moment, turning off the buffer, and stretched his back. A faint gospel hum slipped from his lips. "Precious Lord, take my hand." Low and steady, filling the emptiness of the studio before the bustle of the day began. On the far end of the stage, a group of stagehands arrived, coffee cups in hand. They waved at him, and Sam returned the gesture with a gentle smile. He wasn't a man of many words, but his presence always carried warmth, a steadiness people leaned on without even realizing it. During lunch breaks, some of the younger crew would sit near him, asking for advice about their lives, their dreams, their families. Sam always listened first, speaking only after silence had settled in, offering words that sounded less like advice and more like scripture drawn from hard-won experience. The young folks loved him for that. Mr. Sam, they'd call him, leaning in to catch every word. When the day ended, he walked home to the quiet streets of his small southern town. His little house stood on the corner, paint peeling but the porch light always shining warm. Inside, framed photos lined the walls, his late wife smiling in a Sunday dress, his son in a graduation cap, his granddaughter Maya holding up a handmade protest sign. Law degrees sat high on a shelf, gathering dust, half hidden behind stacks of hymnals and old case files. That night, as he sat at the kitchen table, Maya came bounding in, her backpack heavy, her voice alive with energy. She was 17, bold, sharp-witted, unwilling to let the world tell her who she was. She hugged him from behind, her arms wrapping around his chest. "Granddaddy, you always working," she teased, glancing at the mop leaning against the wall. Sam chuckled softly, patting her arm. "Somebody's got to keep this world clean, baby girl. If not the dirt on the floor, then the dirt in people's hearts." Maya rolled her eyes, but she loved when he talked like that. He always carried dignity, even in small, ordinary moments. Even now, when life had humbled him, stripped him of titles of prestige, of the voice he once commanded in courtrooms across the South, he walked with a quiet strength, the kind that said he had nothing left to prove, and yet everything left to give. The next morning, the studio was buzzing. Trucks lined the lot. Cables snaked across the floor, and the crew hustled under the stern orders of producers who spoke too fast and too loud. At the center of the storm was Chase Dalton, the movie star, a tall, chiseled man with the confidence of someone who believed the world bent for him. Chase strutted across the set, wearing dark sunglasses, though they were inside, his entourage trailing behind. Sam moved quietly along the margins, sweeping near the edge of the soundstage. He didn't seek attention, but his presence was steady, unbothered. That calm irritated Chase, though Sam hadn't yet said a word to him. The actor's eyes caught Sam for the first time as he nearly tripped over the janitor's mop bucket. "Watch it, old man." Chase barked, his voice cutting through the noise. Crew members froze, their heads turning instinctively. Chase ripped off his glasses and glared. "You don't just roll your junk around, wherever you want. What are you even doing here? This is a professional set, not whatever broom closet you came out of." The insult landed heavy in the silence that followed. Some crew members looked down at their shoes, others forced nervous chuckles, unsure of how to react. Sam straightened slowly, resting both hands on the mop handle. His eyes, dark and steady, met Chase's without flinching. "I'm just doing my job, sir," he said softly, the words even respectful, but carrying a weight that made some of the room shift uncomfortably. Chase scoffed. "Your job? Please. You're just a janitor. Don't act like you're anything more than that." A hush swept the room. One of the stagehands tried to speak up. "Hey, man, But Chase cut him off with a raised hand, his face curling into a sneer. Sam said nothing else. He lowered his eyes, adjusted the mop, and quietly moved aside. His restraint only deepened the unease. To some, It looked like humility. To others, like dignity too strong to be broken. But to Chase, it felt like defiance wrapped in silence. The moment passed, the work resumed, but a seed had been planted. A seed of tension, of quiet injustice that would not stay buried for long. The day dragged forward, but the air on set felt different after the morning's exchange. Conversations were quieter. Eyes shifted nervously whenever Sam passed by, and laughter that might have bubbled freely before now came out stifled, uneasy. Sam moved as he always did, his steps measured, his work precise. He swept corners no one else noticed, wiped down railings, and pushed his bucket with the same patience he had carried all his life. But the quiet dignity that steadied him only seemed to needle Chase Dalton more. By late afternoon, the star was in full temper. A scene wasn't going well. The director whispered adjustments, trying to placate him, but Chase erupted anyway, cursing about the amateur crew and the pathetic conditions. His words were loud enough to ricochet off the steel rafters above. And then, in a moment sharp as glass, his anger turned on a young production assistant, a black girl, barely 20, carrying a clipboard pressed to her chest like a shield. "You," Chase barked, pointing at her as if she were a target. "You're the one who's been messing up my marks, aren't you? You got me looking like a damn fool out there." Her voice trembled, barely audible. "No, sir, I just follow the—" "Don't stutter at me. If you can't keep up, you don't belong here. I'll have you fired before lunch tomorrow." She froze, her wide eyes darting toward the director, the producers, anyone who might step in. But no one moved. The room held its breath, complicit in its silence. Sam had been sweeping nearby, his hand still gripping the wooden handle of his broom. He watched her crumble inward, her shoulders folding, her face reddening as the humiliation pressed down on her like weight she couldn't lift. He stepped forward slowly, as though even the air needed gentleness, and set the broom aside. "Sir," Sam said evenly, his voice carrying across the stage, "the young lady's just doing her job. Ain't no harm in mistakes. We all make Heads snapped toward him. The PA's eyes glistened with relief and fear all at once. Chase turned, disbelief twisting his face into something uglier than anger. "Oh, and now the janitor thinks he's a director?" Chase spat, laughing cruelly as his entourage chuckled behind him. "You've got some nerve. Old man, this is my set. You don't get to tell me how to run it." Sam didn't flinch. His voice was soft but unshakable. "I'm not telling you how to run anything. Just saying, no man's job makes him less of a man. Not hers, not mine." The words landed like stones tossed into still water, ripples moving to the crew, unspoken truths surfacing in their eyes. But Chase wasn't listening. His ego swelled against the quiet dignity standing before him. "You don't get to talk to me like that," Chase snapped, pointing a finger so close it nearly touched Sam's chest. "Matter of fact, I don't even want you on my set. Security." Two men in black jackets moved forward. The crew gasped softly but stayed rooted, eyes glued to the scene unraveling before them. The young PA covered her mouth with her hands, horrified. Sam raised his palms, not in surrender, but in calm assurance. "No need for all that," he said quietly. "I'll walk myself out." "Damn right you will," Chase growled, his words dripping with venom. "Pack your bucket and get gone. You're finished here. Fired. Effective immediately." The humiliation was deliberate, public, meant to crush. Phones slipped from pockets, red recording lights flashing in periphery. Sam felt the weight of all those eyes, but his face never faltered. He bent, picked up his broom, and gathered his tools with hands steady as stone. The silence in the room was deafening, every sweep of his movements louder than Chase's shouting had been. As he reached the exit, Sam paused, looking back only once. Not at Chase, but at the young PA, whose tear-streaked face met his with something like gratitude. He gave her the faintest nod, a promise written in silence, before pushing open a heavy door and stepping into the hot southern daylight. Behind him, whispers swelled, the first cracks in the wall of fear. Someone muttered, "That wasn't right." Another voice firmer, "He didn't deserve that." And in the corner, a phone uploaded a video that would soon change everything. Sam walked home with the slow rhythm of a man carrying no shame, though the sting of the insult pressed heavy in his chest. His dignity was intact, but the world had witnessed his humiliation. What Chase had meant as an erasure would become the spark of something larger. Sam knew it in his bones. The fight wasn't over. It was only beginning. Night settled over the town with a hush that seemed heavier than usual, the kind of quiet that pressed against the windows and made the creak of old floorboards sound like thunder. Sam sat at his kitchen table, the lamp above casting a pool of soft yellow light around him. His hands rested on the worn wood, callous fingers tapping idly, as if trying to keep the day from replaying in his mind. But the memory lingered anyway. Chase's words, the laughter, the heavy silence of the crew. He had endured worse in his life. Far worse. But somehow the sting of it carried a sharper edge this time. Maybe because Maya was old enough now to see the world for what it really was. Old enough to know what humiliation looked like. Maya sat across from him, her laptop glowing, her face illuminated by the pale blue light. She had been quiet for most of dinner, but he could feel her energy, tight, restless, charged like a storm waiting for release. Finally, she turned the screen toward him. "Granddaddy," she said softly. "It's everywhere." The video, the moment Chase had fired him, the sneer in his voice, the way Sam had walked out with his head high while the crew shifted uncomfortably in the background. Millions of eyes were already watching it now, dissecting every second. The comments scrolled endlessly. Why did nobody stop him? That old man carried more dignity in silence than that actor ever will. This is America in a nutshell. Sam leaned back, sighing deeply. That ain't a world I care to live in, baby girl. Folks recording pain like it's sport. Maya's eyes sharpened. It's not sport. It's proof. They needed to see this. They needed to see you. She closed the laptop and rose, disappearing into the back room. A moment later, she returned with a cardboard box, its edges frayed, the kind of box that had been carried too many times. She set it on the table with a thud. "You think I don't know who you are?" Sam's chest tightened as she pulled the box open. Out came the past, framed newspaper clippings, court transcripts, glossy photos of Sam in crisp suits standing on courthouse steps. Microphones thrust toward him. Headlines blare across the yellowed paper. Attorney Samuel Hightower wins landmark case on voting rights. Hightower challenges police brutality in federal court. Civil rights lawyer takes corruption to task. Maya spread them across the table, her hands trembling with urgency. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sam stared at the evidence of his own life as though it belonged to someone else. His voice was low, rough with memory. "I didn't want you carrying the weight I carried. Fighting day after day, only to lose more than you gain. You know what it cost me, Maya? Your daddy." His voice broke, soft but jagged. "I fought the system every day in those courts, but I couldn't save my own son from it. They locked him up on a lie, and he didn't come home. That's the truth of what this work takes. And I couldn't do it anymore." Maya's eyes shone, but she didn't look away. "And now you let some arrogant actor take your dignity like you're nothing? That's not the man I see in these papers." Sam pressed his hands together, the veins along his knuckles standing out. He closed his eyes, the weight of the past pressing in on him, until all he could hear was the echo of voices long gone. Judges, clients, protesters. His son called his name across a prison visitation booth. When he opened them again, Maya was still staring, her jaw tight, her fire unshaken. The silence between them carried something unspoken, something alive. Sam reached for one of the clippings, a photo of him shaking hands with John Lewis after court victory. His fingers lingered on it, his lips pressed into a thin line, not quite a smile, but something steadier, stronger. "Maya," he said finally, his voice low but steady, "a man can walk away from a fight, but sometimes the fight finds its way back to him. Maybe this is one of those times." Maya's face broke into something like relief, like hope. "Then let's not waste it. They need to know who you are." Sam looked down at the scattered relics of his old life, the echoes of battles fought and nearly forgotten. His past was no longer hidden. The world had seen the janitor humiliated. Now it would see the man behind the broom, the fighter, the strategist, the voice that once commanded courtrooms. For the first time in years, The embers stirred again inside him. By morning, the town buzzed like a hive split open. At the diner on the corner, televisions flickered with the same loop footage. Chase Dalton's sneer, Sam's calm reply, the firing that followed. Each replay seemed to hit harder than the last. Folks, sipping their coffee, shook their heads, muttering under their breath, "A man his age treated like that? Ain't right." The conversation spilled out of the diner, onto the sidewalks, across pews at the church, and into living rooms where families watched with quiet outrage. The video had traveled far beyond the county lines. Cable news anchors debated it late into the night. On social media, hashtags bloomed like wildfire. Hashtag justice for Sam. Hashtag dignity is not disposable. Hashtag Chase exposed. Influential voices amplified the clip. Civil rights leaders, law professors, journalists who remember Hightower's courtroom triumphs from decades earlier. And then came the reveal. One article unearthed the truth. Janitor humiliated on film set was one civil rights attorney, Samuel Hightower. The headline spread like gospel. Reporters crowded the narrow street outside Sam's modest house. Their vans lined the block, satellite dishes reaching skyward. Neighbors peeked from porches as microphones thrust forward each time Sam stepped outside to collect the mail. He answered none of their questions, his silence more powerful than any statement. But Maya watched with fire in her chest, her phone in hand, crafting posts that pieced together the man behind the broom with the fighter in the archives. She shared the box of clippings, his victories, his speeches, his relentless defense of the powerless. Within hours, her posts were shared tens of thousands of times. At the church that Sunday, the pews overflowed. Sam tried to slip in quietly, as he always did. But the congregation rose when he entered, their applause echoing off the high wooden rafters. Some wept, others raised hands in praise, as if justice itself had walked through the door. The pastor clasped his hand firmly at the altar. "Brother Hightower, we see you," he said, voice trembling, "and we stand with you." But visibility brought more than support. As the days stretched on, so did the risks. Sam noticed unfamiliar cars idling too long near his house. Hate-filled messages flooded his mailbox, some scrawled in red ink. Studio lawyers issued statements painting him as unstable, bitter, a man clinging to faded glory. Chase's fans, too, sharpened their words online, calling Sam a fraud, a leech looking for attention. Maya tried to shield him from the ugliness, but Sam read every word. He didn't flinch. "If they're hollering," he told her one evening, "it's 'cause they scared the truth louder than their lies." And the truth had volume now. Workers in the studio began reaching out quietly. Emails trickled in, whispered phone calls at night. A lighting tech confessed he'd seen Chase harass staff for weeks. A seamstress revealed how Black and Latino crew members were paid less than their white counterparts. A former assistant admitted she was silenced after filing a complaint against a producer. Piece by piece, the stories built a pattern too sharp to ignore. One evening, Sam opened the door to find an old colleague on his porch, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and a briefcase tucked under her arm. Evelyn Moore, once his fiercest ally in the courtroom, now a professor of law at Howard. "Sam," she said, her voice soft but urgent, "you can't let this pass. This isn't just about you. It's about every one of them." Her eyes flicked to Maya, who stood in the doorway clutching her phone. "And you've already got the world watching." Sam leaned against the frame, the weight of it all pressing into his shoulders. He hadn't asked for this fight, not this way. But as the voices grew louder around him, community leaders, young activists, former clients calling in tears, he began to realize the truth Evelyn carried. This wasn't just humiliation. This was exposure. And exposure could burn away more than pride. It could burn through the rot of an entire system. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deep, then looked to Maya. She met his gaze with that same unshakable fire, her jaw set. For the first time in years, Sam felt the tide shift beneath his feet. The question wasn't whether he'd fight. The question was how. The living room had transformed into a war room. Stacks of papers lay across the coffee table, manila folders bulging with affidavits, contracts, and pay stubs smuggled out by sympathetic crew members. The box of Sam's old case files, untouched for years, now sat open, its contents spread like blueprints for battle. Evelyn Moore leaned over the table, glasses perched low on her nose, her pen scratching notes furiously. Maya sat nearby, laptop open, her fingers flying across the keys as she cataloged testimonies, uploading files into a secure drive. Sam stood at the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Outside, the reporters still lingered, their cameras flashing whenever shadows moved against the blinds. He watched them for a long moment, then turned back to the table, his voice calm but carrying a weight that hushed the room. "They think this is about one man's pride," he said. "They think I'm angry because a famous fool called me just a janitor. But we know better. This isn't just about words. It's about how they treat the people who keep the machine running, the ones they think no one will notice when they're stepped on." Evelyn looked up, her eyes glinting. "Then we'll make them notice. We've got enough here to build a case for discriminatory practices, wrongful termination, hostile workplace environment. And with your name back in the public eye, they can't bury it like they used to." Maya tapped the laptop, spinning it around to show them a spreadsheet. "We've got wage gaps documented. Black and Latino crew members making less than their white counterparts in the same positions. I've got emails where workers were denied promotions, complaints that went unanswered. It's all here." Sam moved to the table, pulling up a chair. His fingers grazed the papers, tracing the lines of injustice like old scars he knew too well. The lawyer in him, the man he had buried under years of grief, stirred awake, sharpening. He picked up a contract, his eyes narrowing as he read. "See here, Clause 7. It allows termination without cause but requires 30 days severance. They fire me on the spot. If they'll break their own contracts to protect him, what else will they break?" Evelyn nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "There he is. The Hightower I remember." They worked deep into the night. The walls of the small house seemed to bend around their urgency, the lamplight burning long after midnight. Evelyn outlined legal strategies. Sam refined them, and Maya documented everything with the sharp precision of someone born into an era where truth could spread faster than any lie. But it wasn't just legal maneuvers. Sam understood optics, the power of timing, the necessity of restraint. "We don't storm in guns blazing," he told them. "We move like water, quiet, steady, wearing them down piece by piece until they have nowhere left to stand." A plan took shape. Affidavits signed under seal, anonymous testimonies released strategically, media allies primed to publish the truth in waves rather than a single burst. Lawsuits would follow, but first, exposure. Let the studio try to silence one voice, and another would rise. Let them smear one worker, and 10 more would step forward. By dawn, when the first birds began to call from the magnolia trees outside, Sam leaned back in his chair, exhaustion lining his face but his eyes alive with fire. He looked at Maya, whose head now rested against her arm on the table. "She reminds me of her daddy," he whispered, voice thick with memory. That same stubborn streak, that same need to speak up. Evelyn followed his gaze, her voice soft. "Then maybe this time, Sam, you'll get to finish what you started." For him. Sam's chest rose and fell slowly, his hand resting on the pile of evidence as though it were sacred text. He had once walked away from the fight, convinced it had cost him too much. But the fight had found him again, and this time he wasn't alone. The courthouse steps were alive with voices, a swell of bodies pressed together under the southern sun. Protest signs waved above the crowd. Dignity is not a crime. Justice for workers, and oh, one is just a janitor. Reporters jostled for position, their microphones angled like bayonets toward the heavy wooden doors. And when those doors swung open, the crowd surged, cameras flashing as Samuel Hightower entered with Evelyn Moore to side, Maya close behind him. Sam wore a plain navy suit, pressed but not new, its shoulders softened with age. His stride was measured, neither hurried nor hesitant. If the weight of the cameras unsettled him, he did not show it. His eyes were steady, his jaw firm, his posture carrying the same quiet dignity that had once filled courtrooms decades ago. Today, it filled this one again. Inside, the courtroom was packed to the walls. Journalists filled the benches. Workers sat shoulder to shoulder, and along the back row, Sam could see the young PA whose humiliation had sparked all of this. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, but when her eyes met his, he gave the faintest nod, steadying her. Across the aisle, Chase Dalton sat with his legal team, designer suit gleaming under the lights, jaw clenched as if he were still performing for an audience. His arrogance seemed thinner now, brittle around the edges. But when the judge entered, Chase leaned back in his chair, smirk tugging at his lips, as if certain fame would shield him. The proceedings began, lawyers volleying objections and motions, the hum of legal jargon filling the air. But when Sam rose to deliver his examination, the room shifted. He didn't stride. He walked, slow, deliberate, each step echoing like a reminder. The hush that fell wasn't forced. It was gravity. "Mr. Dalton," Sam began, his voice low but resonant. "On the day in question, do you recall making statements to me regarding my position?" Chase leaned forward, smirking. "I recall asking why a janitor thought he could tell me how to do my job. Yes." A murmur rippled through the room. Sam didn't react. He turned to the jury. "And you recall what you said exactly?" Chase shrugged, careless. "I told you you're just a janitor. Because you are. Let's not pretend otherwise." Sam's gaze held steady on him, then shifted to the screen where a monitor flickered to life. "Let's not pretend otherwise, indeed." With a click, the video played. Chase's voice filled the room, dripping with disdain. "You're nothing but a janitor." The courtroom went silent. The jury's eyes fixed on the screen, then on Sam, then back to Chase, whose smirk faltered just enough for the cameras to catch it. Sam let the silence linger before speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you just heard is not merely the insult of one man to another. It is the voice of an industry that profits off the labor of the unseen. It is the voice of a system that believes some people are disposable, that their dignity can be trampled without consequence. But dignity," he paused, his voice thickening, "is not a job title. It is not wealth. It is not fame. It is the measure of a man's humanity. And that cannot be stripped away by arrogance, nor bought by money." Chase's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled, leaning forward, eyes narrowed. The jury leaned in too, drawn by the quiet fire in Sam's tone. One by one, testimonies followed, workers detailing discrimination, wage theft, harassment. Evelyn guided them with surgical precision, Sam reinforcing each piece with calm questions that tied the threads into a noose. By the time the seamstress finished recounting how her complaints vanished into silence, the jury's faces were hard with anger. Finally, Sam stood for closing arguments. He didn't pace, didn't shout. He simply placed both hands on the table, leaning forward, as if speaking not to the court but to the soul of every person listening. "I came into this courthouse a janitor," he said, his eyes sweeping the room, "and I will leave it one, because there is no shame in honest work. But I have also been a lawyer, a husband, a father, and I stand here to remind you that no man, no studio, no system has the right to decide who matters and who does not. We are measured not by the titles they give us, but by the truth we carry. Today, that truth is in your hands." He stepped back, silence hanging like thunder about to break. For a heartbeat, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, the murmur began, building, swelling, until the judge banged the gavel to restore order. But the truth had already landed, and Chase Dalton knew, in the silence that followed, that his world had just cracked wide open. The verdict came down in the late afternoon, when the light outside had turned gold and heavy, spilling through the courthouse windows in long streaks. The jury filed back in, faces solemn, but when the forewoman rose, her voice carried with the strength of a bell. "We find in favor of the plaintiff." The room erupted. Cheers from workers, shouts of relief, applause breaking out before the gavel could silence it. Chase Dalton sat rigid, his mask cracking for all to see, the sheen of invincibility stripped away. His eyes darted toward the cameras, searching for an angle that could still protect him. But none came. His name, once untouchable, now carried a new weight, one tied not to fame but to shame. Sam did not smile. He simply bowed his head, whispering something too soft to catch. Maya placed a hand on his shoulder, steady and proud. Evelyn's eyes glistened as she closed her file, watching her mentor reclaim the power he had once thought buried. When they stepped outside, the courthouse steps were alive again. Reporters surged forward, their microphones a sea of silver stems. Workers chanted Sam's name, their voices echoing against the stone columns. But when the questions rained down, how does it feel to win? What's your message to Chase Dalton? Sam lifted a hand. The crowd quieted, as if instinctively knowing his words carried more weight than any headline. I don't call this a victory, he said, his voice even, steady against the hum of traffic and chanting, because victory implies someone else's defeat. What happened here today is not about me and Mr. Dalton. It's about something larger. It's about saying to every man and woman who cleans the floors, who sews the costumes, who hold this industry on their back, you matter. Your dignity matters. And no one has a right to strip it away. For a moment, the silence was profound. Even the reporters lowered their microphones, some blinking back tears they hadn't expected. Later that evening, Sam returned to his modest home. The house was filled with people, neighbors, workers, young activists who had joined the fight. Food was spread across the kitchen table, laughter rising in waves, children darting between legs. It felt less like a celebration and more like a gathering of family, bound not by blood but by survival and solidarity. Sam slipped away from the noise, stepping onto the porch. The cicadas sang in the trees, their drone carrying through the heavy air. He lowered himself into the old rocking chair, its wood creaking under his weight, and let the night settle around him. Maya found him there, 2 glasses of sweet tea in hand. She set one beside him and leaned against the railing, watching the fireflies spark in the grass. You did it, she whispered. He shook his head. We did it, and it's not over. It never is. But maybe, he exhaled, the sound somewhere between weariness and peace. Maybe this time, the ripples will reach farther than the stone. Maya's hand brushed his, and for a long while they sat in silence, listening to the hum of the night. The next morning, headlines blazed across the country. Janitor turned lawyer brings down Hollywood star. Samuel Hightower redefines dignity in landmark case. Commentators debated. Workers organized. Politicians scrambled to respond. But in living rooms, kitchens, and union halls, ordinary people watched Sam's words replayed on television and felt, if only for a moment, that their own lives carried weight. Weeks later, when Sam walked into the high school auditorium where a panel on labor rights was being held, the students rose to their feet. They had studied him now, not as a janitor, not as a lawyer, but as proof that quiet dignity could stand against arrogance, proof that patience, strategy, and truth could outlast cruelty. Sam stood at the podium, the hum of young voices fading into silence. His hands rested on the wood, rough from years of use. He looked out over the crowd, not at their faces, but into their eyes, searching for the spark he once feared he had lost. And when he began to speak, his voice carried not the tremor of an old man, but the timbre of a legacy, one that would outlive him. Justice, he said softly, is not an end, it is a seed, and each of us must plant it where we stand. The applause rose like thunder, but Sam only lowered his gaze, smiling faintly. He knew then that the work would go on long after him, that the seed had taken root,